The winter wind over northern France carried a sharp metallic chill, sweeping across the open fields near Merlin. It was late December 1944, the kind of morning when frost clung to every surface and the air itself seemed to hum. Then came the sound, distant at first, then growing, a deep, throaty purr unlike the clipped whine of a Messerschmitt. German soldiers paused, scanning the sky. Out of the haze came a glint of polished metal, a sleek, silver aircraft cutting low through the mist. Smoke curled from one wing. The plane wobbled, dipped, then leveled again, fighting gravity. Its silhouette was unfamiliar, longer nose, bubble canopy, unmistakable grace. The machine skimmed the frozen hedgerow and settled hard onto a snow-dusted field, sliding to a stop in a hiss of steam. Wehrmacht troops closed in cautiously, rifles raised, but curiosity stronger than fear. One stepped forward, brushing frost from the nose. P-51 Mustang. For the first time, German pilots would put the Mustang through its paces. When the war began in 1939, few could have predicted that a small American company, North American Aviation, would design one of the most decisive aircraft in history. The British, desperate to expand their fighter fleet, approached the firm in 1940 with a request: build Curtiss P-40s under license. But North American's engineers, led by James Dutch Kindleberger and Edgar Schmood, made a bold counteroffer to design an entirely new fighter from the ground up. In just 117 days, the prototype NA-73X took shape, sleek, efficient, and ahead of its time. It featured a laminar flow wing, minimizing drag and giving it an uncanny ability to hold speed at altitude. Yet its first versions, powered by the Allison V1710 engine, lacked performance above 15,000 feet, adequate for ground attack, but outmatched in high-altitude duels. The turning point came in 1942, when British engineers fitted the airframe with the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, the same power plant that gave the Spitfire its legendary reach. The transformation was staggering. Suddenly, the Mustang could climb with the best of them and sustain speeds over 430 mph. The P-51B and later P-51D variants emerged as true, long-range escorts, the answer to the Allies' most urgent problem: how to protect bombers deep over Germany. By late 1943, the U.S. 8th Air Force's daylight bombing raids over Europe were suffering catastrophic losses. B-17 and B-24 formations often went unescorted beyond the Rhine, falling prey to the Luftwaffe's veteran Jagdgeschwader. The Mustang changed that equation almost overnight. With external fuel tanks, it could escort bombers from English bases to Berlin and back. The arrival of the Mustang marked a new phase in the air war. The Allies, for the first time, could take the fight to the heart of Germany with fighters that could outfly and outlast their opponents. For the Luftwaffe, stretched thin across multiple fronts, this was the beginning of an irreversible decline. In 1944, as the Western Allies prepared for the Normandy invasion, the Mustang became a symbol of dominance. To German commanders, it was a mystery machine, elegant, deadly, and unrelenting in the sky. And when one finally came down intact behind their lines, it offered a rare chance to see what made the Allied marvel truly tick. By early 1944, Allied bombers filled the skies above occupied Europe. Massive formations of B-17s and B-24s rumbled toward industrial cities like Regensburg, Schweinfurt, and Berlin, the very arteries of Germany's war machine. Yet now, something new danced among their formations. Silver fighters with shimmering wings and long noses. The P-51 Mustangs flying effortlessly at 25,000 feet. For German pilots, these aircraft seemed to appear out of nowhere, darting through contrails and striking with precision before vanishing back into the clouds. Radio chatter filled with disbelief. A new American fighter. fast, climbs like a devil, and doesn't leave us. By spring, the Luftwaffe's veterans realized the Mustang wasn't just another Allied design. It was a weapon that had turned the sky itself against them. It wasn't long before fortune delivered a captured specimen. Several Mustangs were forced down across France, Belgium, and Germany, some damaged by flak, others out of fuel after escorting bombers far beyond previous limits. One of the earliest intact captures was near Münster in 1944, where a P-51B bellied onto a field after taking ground fire. The Luftwaffe's recovery teams, trained to secure downed Allied aircraft, immediately cordoned off the wreck. Within hours, engineers from the Luftwaffe's technical branch and the Rechlin test center were notified. To the Germans, these machines were invaluable. Captured Allied fighters had long been part of a quiet intelligence effort. Every aircraft examined, catalogued, and, if possible, restored to flying condition. The goal was to learn their strengths, weaknesses, and production secrets. The Mustang, however, represented something more elusive, a technological philosophy the Germans hadn't quite mastered. The perfect balance between speed, range, and simplicity. The captured P-51 was shipped to Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's central test airfield north of Berlin, where engineers and pilots began an exhaustive evaluation. Reports described the aircraft's refined aerodynamics, its easy handling, and its remarkable engine efficiency. The Rolls-Royce Merlin, now built under license by Packard in America, delivered unmatched power at high altitude, while the laminar flow wing reduced drag so efficiently that even German experts were astonished. As the war situation deteriorated, each captured Mustang became a treasure trove of data, a chance to understand how the Allies had leapt ahead. Intelligence officers and senior staff within Göring's headquarters awaited every test result, hoping to extract lessons that might save their dwindling air arm. The stage was now set for the next phase. German test pilots, including some of the most daring in the Luftwaffe, would climb into the cockpit of their enemy's most formidable machine. What they discovered would change their perception of Allied aviation forever. The Mustang's secret was not a single innovation, but the harmony of several. A synergy that even German engineers, long accustomed to aerodynamic mastery, found deeply impressive. At its heart lay the Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin Phi-1650 engine, a licensed American production of Britain's famed Merlin 61. With a two-stage, two-speed supercharger, the engine maintained full power above 25,000 feet, something few Luftwaffe fighters could claim by 1944. Matched to this was the Mustang's laminar flow wing, an aerodynamic breakthrough that delayed airflow separation and drastically reduced drag. This allowed the aircraft to cruise faster and farther on less fuel, an engineering philosophy built not for short, fierce duels, but for dominance over distance. When test pilots at Rechlin clocked the Mustang's top speed at 444 km/h, 714 km/h in level flight, they realized it was not just fast. It was redefining what a piston engine fighter could be. Even more unsettling was its range. With drop tanks, the P-51 could escort bombers deep into Germany, to Berlin and back, something the Luftwaffe had never considered possible for a single-engine fighter. It changed the mathematics of air war. One German engineer remarked in post-war interrogation, "We could no longer wait for the bombers. The fighters were already there when they arrived." Then came the human angle, the experience of flying it. German test pilots approached the Mustang with both reverence and suspicion. Among them was Hauptmann Hans-Werner Lerche, the Luftwaffe's foremost evaluator of captured Allied aircraft. Lerche, who had flown nearly every major Allied fighter, described the Mustang as a pilot's aircraft in every sense. Light on the stick, perfectly stable, responsive in all maneuvers. For the German pilots, it was a paradoxical experience. to sit in the cockpit of a machine designed to kill their comrades, yet feel awe at its craftsmanship. Hannah Reich, the celebrated test pilot, once remarked on the humanity of Allied designs, how comfort, visibility, and balance seemed built into them. The Mustang embodied that philosophy. When Lurch lifted the Mustang into the cold air above Rechlin, his first report was simple: outstanding visibility, superb climb, harmonious control. What struck him most was not raw speed, but confidence, the sense that the aircraft forgave the pilot. Unlike the Bf-109, which punished heavy hands, the Mustang allowed fluid, intuitive flying. To the men of Rechlin, the conclusion was unavoidable. The Allies had achieved something the Luftwaffe could admire, but not replicate: a fighter that was both powerful and graceful. From the tactical perspective, the Mustang shattered every Luftwaffe assumption about how air combat would unfold. For years, German interception doctrine had relied on speed and climb advantage: short, sharp engagements near bomber formations, followed by dives back to base before Allied escorts could respond. But the arrival of the Mustang in late 1943 and early 1944 destroyed that logic. When P-51s began flying deep escort missions with the 8th Air Force, German fighter wings found themselves hunted rather than hunters. The Mustang's range of over 1,600 kilometers with drop tanks allowed it to linger above bomber routes, waiting. Its pilots used superior altitude performance and energy retention to dictate the fight. Suddenly, Luftwaffe squadrons that had once ambushed bomber formations were now being engaged over their own airfields, a psychological reversal that no tactical training could offset. Test results at Rechlin confirmed the grim reality. Even in one-on-one combat trials against the Bf-109G6 or early FW-190A8, the Mustang held advantages in sustained turn, dive acceleration, and high-altitude performance. What Germany's engineers found most demoralizing was how little weakness they could find. It had no single exploitable flaw. Within Göring's leadership and the Technisches Amt, the captured Mustang caused both fascination and discomfort. Reports from Rechlin were circulated to senior staff with cautious wording, an acknowledgement of the Mustang's superiority paired with bureaucratic defensiveness. The aircraft demonstrates advanced Anglo-American progress in aerodynamic integration, one memo stated, though its performance is aided by external fuel carriage and unsuitable for mass deployment in European conditions. It was a diplomatic way to disguise defeat in engineering terms. Privately, some Luftwaffe officers admitted admiration. Others, particularly among Göring's inner circle, refused to concede that Allied design could outmatch German ingenuity. Göring himself, when briefed on the Mustang's capabilities in early 1944, reportedly dismissed it. The Americans build fast cars, not real fighters. Yet the truth was visible in the skies above Berlin. Beneath that denial, a quieter moral tension spread through the Luftwaffe ranks. German test pilots respected excellence wherever they found it. And the Mustang represented an uncomfortable mirror. It was not just faster, it was smarter. Its systems were reliable, its engine seldom failed, and its ergonomics reflected a deep understanding of pilot fatigue. By 1944, as Allied air superiority became unchallengeable, the Mustang was no longer just a machine. It was a symbol. It embodied the industrial depth, technological pragmatism, and human-centered design that Germany, exhausted by years of war and isolation, could no longer match. And for the men at Rechlin, that realization was inescapable. The tests had begun as a curiosity. They ended as an admission that the war in the air was already lost. By early 1944, one of the captured Mustangs, a P-51B 120A, serial number 43-12101, forced down near Achmer, was transported to the Rechlin Luftwaffe Test Center, north of Berlin. There, under strict secrecy, it was prepared for full technical evaluation. The airframe was repaired by mechanics of Erprobungsstelle Rechlin, the same facility that had tested nearly every Allied and Axis aircraft of the war. The aircraft, still bearing faint traces of RAF roundels under its hastily applied German crosses, was assigned to Hauptmann Hans Werner Lerche, the Luftwaffe's lead test pilot for foreign types. His task, to determine whether the Mustang's combat reputation was myth or mechanical fact. The first flight took place on a cold, windless morning in February 1944. Lerche advanced the throttle of the Packard Merlin Phi 1650, feeling the vibrations smooth into a steady hum. The takeoff roll was short. The aircraft lifted eagerly at 120 km/h, climbing at a rate that rivaled the Bf-109G. Once airborne, Lerche leveled off at 20,000 feet and opened the throttle to military power. The airspeed indicator climbed 390, 410, 430 km/h with stability that astonished him. The controls remain light and harmonized even beyond 400 km/h. "Sie kan fortsätta mer," he later wrote in his report. There is no tendency to compressibility or heavy elevator. Over the following weeks, Rechlin pilots ran the Mustang through exhaustive tests. Climb rates, sustained turns, dive recovery, and stall behavior. Engineers logged data from onboard instruments, coolant temperatures, boost pressures, manifold response, comparing them to those of the Bf-109G6 and the FW-190A8. The results left little room for debate. The Mustang could climb faster, cruise farther, and maintain speed through high G turns with less structural stress. Perhaps most impressive was its behavior at high altitude. At 30,000 feet, where German engines often gasped for air, the Merlin still delivered near full-rated power. Test instruments recorded a service ceiling of over 41,000 feet, more than any standard Luftwaffe fighter could reach. Lerche and his fellow test pilot, Oberleutnant Gustav Benecke, pushed the aircraft in steep dives, noting its remarkable control retention even past 500 mph indicated airspeed. The laminar flow wings held firm. Recovery required only gentle input. For a generation of pilots accustomed to aircraft that fought back at the edge of performance, this was a revelation. Back on the ground, the tone of the engineers' debriefs shifted from curiosity to unease. The Mustang was no longer a rumor. It was a measurable, tangible advantage. Rechlin's final report phrased it with typical German precision. In overall balance of speed, range, and control harmony, the American P-51 represents the most advanced single-engine fighter aircraft yet encountered. That sentence, quietly filed away in 1944, marked the Luftwaffe's turning point. The moment realization replaced denial. The results from Rechlin traveled quickly through the Luftwaffe's technical and command hierarchy. Copies of the Mustang evaluation reached the Technisches Amt in Berlin and the design bureaus of Messerschmitt, Focke-Wulf, and Heinkel. The findings were both admired and alarming. The Mustang had effectively closed the gap between tactical and strategic air power. German engineers studied its performance curves, fuel efficiency, and cooling system with forensic intensity. The two-stage supercharger of the Packard Merlin drew particular fascination. An elegant integration that allowed sustained high-altitude performance without overheating, something German DB605 and BMW 801 engines struggled to achieve. Messerschmitt engineers responded by refining the Bf-109G10 and developing the Bf-109K series, attempting to match the Mustang's altitude and speed. Focke-Wulf, meanwhile, pursued the FW-190D Dora and the Ta-152, both conceived as high-altitude countermeasures. Yet the Germans were now fighting against time itself. For every incremental improvement in the Reich's fighters, the Allies fielded hundreds of Mustangs. The Luftwaffe's dwindling fuel, eroding pilot training programs, and fractured production lines meant that technical parity could never translate into strategic recovery. Inside Rechlin's hangars, test reports became exercises in futility. Engineers proposed copying aspects of the Mustang's wing structure, but Germany's aluminum shortages and manufacturing constraints made such designs impractical. Even the laminar flow profile, revolutionary as it was, demanded surface precision beyond what late-war German factories could maintain under constant bombing. Strategically, the Luftwaffe leadership attempted to downplay the Mustang's significance. Göring's staff circulated internal briefings claiming that superior pilot skill could offset American range advantage. But by mid-1944, that illusion collapsed. When Göring reportedly looked up at contrails high over Berlin and was told they were escorted bombers from England, he muttered, "I knew the war was lost." Those contrails belonged to Mustangs. At the tactical level, captured aircraft tests influenced subtle but important changes in Luftwaffe doctrine. Interception tactics were reoriented toward high-speed boom-and-zoom attacks rather than sustained turning fights. But it was a desperate adjustment, not a new strategy. Pilots now fought under the shadow of an enemy that could chase them home. Even as the jet-powered Me-262 promised a last technological leap, the Mustang remained the benchmark for what piston engine design could achieve. In every report, its balance, power, control, range, and reliability stood as a standard German engineers acknowledged but could not surpass. The Luftwaffe's test programs, once symbols of innovation, had become post-mortems on a war already slipping away. What began with curiosity over a captured American fighter ended as a recognition of total air inferiority. And from that realization came a quiet, bitter truth that the Germans had tested the future, and it no longer belonged to them. The Luftwaffe's evaluation of the captured Mustang in early 1944 had immediate tactical consequences, but few practical remedies. Once the Mustang's true range and altitude performance were understood, German command realized that traditional interception doctrine, launching fighters only as bombers approached, was obsolete. By the time formations reached German skies, Mustangs were already sweeping ahead, clearing the air of defenders. In response, Luftwaffe planners issued new directives emphasizing dispersed takeoffs and climbing intercepts far earlier in bomber approach routes. Units like JG-26 and JG-11, based in northern France and the Low Countries, were ordered to engage at higher altitudes and avoid sustained dogfights. The goal was to strike fast, retreat, and regroup, a return to hit-and-run tactics. But this strategy only confirmed the Luftwaffe's deteriorating position. The Allied side, by contrast, capitalized on the Mustang's potential almost immediately. The U.S. 8th Air Force, once limited by the range of its escorts, began deep penetration raids on targets previously considered unreachable: Leipzig, Regensburg, and Berlin. The long-range coverage meant bomber losses fell sharply, from over 20% on unescorted raids in 1943 to under 5% by mid-1944. German test reports, including Lurch's evaluations at Rechlin, filtered through intelligence channels and reached Allied command indirectly through intercepted communications and post-war analysis. They confirmed what Allied pilots already sensed, that even the enemy regarded the Mustang with reluctant respect. Still, the Luftwaffe sought answers. Designers at Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf accelerated work on high-altitude variants like the Bf-109K4 and FW-190D9, while experimental jet programs, the Me-262 and He-162, gained new urgency, but none could enter service in sufficient numbers to alter the air war's course. By mid-1944, Göring's elite Jagdgeschwader 300 and JG-301, the Wild Sow night fighter units pressed into daylight defense, faced Mustangs daily. Reports from the front carried a consistent refrain: enemy escorts at all altitudes. Impossible to attack bombers without losses. The Luftwaffe had entered a cycle of reaction while the Allies defined the pace. Every captured Mustang confirmed the same conclusion Rechlin had reached. The Americans had achieved not just a faster aircraft, but a strategic weapon built on logistics, production, and endurance. For Germany's fighter force, the Mustang was not merely an opponent. It was a mirror showing how far behind they had fallen. In the months that followed, the full impact of the Mustang rippled across the collapsing air war. By the summer of 1944, Mustangs flew daily from English fields across occupied Europe, shepherding the U.S. 8th and 15th Air Forces on daylight raids that reached deep into the Reich. What began as a technical experiment, a fighter, grafted with a British engine, had become the decisive instrument of Allied air supremacy. The Mustang's combination of speed, agility, and endurance transformed the rhythm of the campaign. Bomber crews who once dreaded unescorted missions now watched silver P-51s weaving through their formations, diving to scatter attacking Bf-109s and FW-190s. This persistent escort coverage not only reduced bomber losses, but also bled the Luftwaffe's remaining veteran pilots in relentless attrition. Battles from the Big Week Offensive in February 1944 through the spring assaults over Berlin and beyond captured Mustangs, a handful in total, recovered from forced landings in France, Holland, and Germany, continued to serve at Rechlin and auxiliary test centers like Oberpfaffenhofen and Merseburg. Most were eventually destroyed in Allied bombings or scrapped before war's end. Their reports, however, survived, and after 1945, several were recovered by Allied technical teams under Operation Lusty, the sweeping post-war intelligence effort to gather Axis research data. These files provided a rare German perspective on the Mustang's dominance, precise, methodical, and tinged with reluctant respect. Meanwhile, production of the Mustang surged to industrial levels unimaginable to Germany's fragmented aircraft industry. Between 1940 and 1945, over 15,000 Mustangs were built in U.S. plants, a logistical feat backed by unbroken fuel supply, stable factories, and abundant trained crews. New variants like the P-51D introduced a bubble canopy and improved visibility, while late-war P-51H prototypes pushed top speeds beyond 470 mm. Yet, even the earlier P-51B and C models remained the backbone of Allied air power through 1945. By the time Germany surrendered, the Luftwaffe's operational strength had fallen to a fraction of its 1940 peak. In contrast, Mustang-equipped squadrons flew unchallenged over the ruined cities of the Reich. When Allied pilots finally landed on German airfields in May 1945, they often found the wrecks of captured P-51s beside the debris of the very aircraft they had outflown. The Mustang's ultimate victory lay not only in combat statistics, but in what it symbolized, a technological crescendo of Allied coordination, vision, and endurance. From the ruins of Rechlin to the skies over Berlin, one truth remained clear. The Germans had tested the Mustang to understand it. And in doing so, they had proven why it could never be beaten. In the end, the P-51 Mustang was more than a machine of war. It was the union of technology, doctrine, and belief. Proof that engineering could serve strategy as powerfully as courage served conviction. It symbolized the moment when air power ceased to be about proximity and became about reach, when a fighter could fly to the heart of an enemy's empire, protect bombers, and still duel on equal terms. For the Germans who tested it, the Mustang was both revelation and reckoning. Their admiration was genuine, but it carried a sting. They recognized in it the clarity of purpose their own war effort had lost. A balance between industrial strength and human design, between speed and forgiveness. Rechlin's test pilots, who had once dissected every captured Allied aircraft with cold precision, now confronted a creation they could only respect. In the post-war years, as Luftwaffe veterans looked back, many admitted that the Mustang marked a turning of the age. It was the last great piston-engine fighter, and the first that truly transcended the limits of its time. Its legacy endures not only in museums and air shows, but in the philosophy it represented, that mastery in warfare is not born from arrogance, but from adaptability, discipline, and vision. The Germans had flown the Mustang, measured it, and feared it. And in doing so, they learned a final, humbling truth: that air superiority is not a weapon, but a will.